An extra pick out of nowhere, speed for days, and another pass rusher here on day 3 of the 2024 NFL Draft. We're talking about it all on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, the author of Touchdown Miami. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in on this special Saturday night edition of Locked On Dolphins. We are looking at day 3 of the 2024 NFL Draft and getting into it with 5 picks made throughout the course of the day, and including one in the 4th round the Dolphins weren't scheduled to make. We're getting into all of that, but today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I do have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. 5 picks, 1 in the 4th, 1 in the 5th, 2 in the 6th, and 1 in the 7th. And the Dolphins did not take long to create a bit of a splash on day 3 of the 2024 NFL Draft after drafting Chop Robinson at number 21 overall and Patrick Paul at 55 overall. And we did recap shows on both of those players. And can I just say, like, when I'm effusively positive about something that's happened, I get accused of gassing up Chris Grier all the time. And I offered some constructive criticism on the picks at 21 and 55 for things that I had a different vision for. And I get hammered for being overtly negative. We all want the Dolphins. We all love the Dolphins, right? I guess that's the good feedback, that you're being honest when both sides of the fence at some point or another take exception with what you say. But I see the pathway for success for the Dolphins' early picks. And then you combine that with a day 3 that we're going to get overtly positive on this show talking about day 3. Because I think the Miami Dolphins did a wonderful job on day 3. And for as much of the discussion early or in the pre-draft process was we're going to go BPA early and then we're going to maybe fill some of our needs later in the draft, I think the Dolphins got BPA selections on day 3 that shine very brightly for this team. And we're going to talk about all of them, but we're going to start with the pick that didn't exist at the start of day 3, which was the 120th overall selection. This was one of seemingly a dozen trades that Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles made on draft weekend. And the Dolphins sent a 2025 third-round draft choice to Philadelphia for the 120th pick in the NFL draft. And you knew, and the Dolphins kind of admitted to on Thursday night, they were trying to get back up. They were trying to create another pick, and you kind of got the sense from how they were talking about it and some of the whispers about it that they were maybe trying to get up without and add an extra pick to the class. And they did that by pulling from their 3rd round next year. And we'll talk about 2025 draft capital notes at the very end of the show. But of course, the expectation and how you handle free agency and outgoing free agents gives you a little bit more flexibility to not be at a draft capital deficit next year and do this. And they do traditionally say that a pick a year in advance is worth 1 round less in the current year. So they send a 3, they get back a 4. There's a middle of the 4th round draft pick. And doing that and keeping 158 allows the Dolphins to draft Jaylen Wright, the running back out of the University of Tennessee. This is a 210-pound runner with 4.3 speed, high 4.3 speed, played in an offense that doesn't necessarily have a ton of overlap with an NFL offense. It's a very wide-open college-based offense, a lot of unorthodox splits of the wide receivers, creates a lot of grass for the runners. But there's elements of Jaylen Wright that I think are very appealing for the Dolphins to add to the mix. One of the things is I think he might be the most effective gap runner on the roster right now. You think about Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane and their vision and zone feel and their ability to cut and stick their foot in the ground and explode out of there while stretching to the outside with a lot of the outside zone stuff. I think Jaylen Wright's in Tennessee, with just how their offense ran, there was a lot of inside runs there, but capable of getting downhill between the tackles. But if you give him a crease and you pop the crease, he'll gouge you. Just ask the University of Florida. It's a player who showed some growth and strides in pass protection and in the passing game this past year. He saw a major boost, Jaylen Wright did, in his contributions in the passing game. And his responsibilities in pass protection was something that needed to grow for that to happen. And you saw that this past season. There were some people that thought this was a top 3 back in the class. Ball security is kind of the big hiccup point for him that you'll be looking for the Dolphins ironing out for him to be the best version of himself that you possibly can be. 5'10 and a half, 210 pounds, 4.38, 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical jump, 12 feet 2 inches. I'm doing that math off the top of my head. I mean, that's a 98th percentile standing broad jump. Like, super explosive guy. Into the mix with Achane and Mostert. And Jeff Wilson's still here. And I think the thing that as I processed that pick as it was made, that I immediately went to was passing down situations, whether you're in 21 personnel with 2 backs and a tight end, or if you're in 2 personnel, which would be no tight ends and 2 backs, and you go 3 wide receivers out on the field. The ability to have Jaylen Wright and Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert, but I think Achane with his versatility and then Wright with what he can do in pass protection, that can be a foil that also runs routes and can get out into space a little bit. They didn't do too much of that at Tennessee, but you see the potential there. That's kind of the recipe that you think about how Miami can play these talents off of each other. And the 2-back passing down stuff, which we talked about last year with Mostert and Achane, and you saw some success with it. But down the stretch, they got a little banged up. They kind of had to go away from it. That, plus a more dynamic tight end for when you're in 21 personnel with Jonnu Smith, gives you, I think, more players that can threaten the middle of the field. So if you had Jonnu Smith, Jaylen Wright, Devon Achane, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, theoretically at some point in time, all on the field at the same time, that poses a lot of spacing challenges. And I think that's a potential for this Dolphins team as we really dig into Jaylen Wright and who he is, and knowing that he's a bigger back and he can run in between the tackles, but he can pass protect. All of those layers, I think, give you some really interesting stuff to add into the mix for what the Dolphins have offensively. But this was so this was a player that I had 100th overall on my Dolphins specific big board. So he was a top 100 player for me. They get him at 120. There's a plus value, right? And if you care about my rankings, I would like to think if you're here listening, you at least to some degree care about my opinion, because it's the show's about, right? Is me not just saying what happened, but exploring it and sharing my insight and my perspective on it. It's a plus value on day 3. I think if you were to ask a lot of the analytics-based people, they would maybe take some exception with trading a future draft pick for a this year draft pick to draft a running back. But I think this has a little bit of offensive weapon potential to it as well. I think there's enough on that menu. And when you're compounding speed and getting more in the identity of what you are, but it's a bigger player and a different body type than what you have, I think there's a lot of good here with this pick of Jaylen Wright. And again, because the Dolphins are protected with what they're expecting for compensatory picks to get another day 2 back next year as a result of free agency net gains and losses, you're really taking that strategy and just sliding down the draft order in the 3rd round a little bit versus what your organic pick would be, which is what you've traded away because you can't trade picks you haven't been assigned yet. So we're going to shift gears and go into round 5 and round 6 here next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, where I think the Dolphins got a couple of really, really good BPA picks. We're going to take our focus there next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $150 on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you guys paid attention to the individual player profiles, and then we did the positional previews for the 2024 NFL draft, you would know one of the gold star players that I think would have been an outstanding fit for the Dolphins was Colorado State pass rusher Mohamed Kamara. And the Dolphins actually have him fall into their lap at 158 overall, and that's a super exciting pick. For me, for the Dolphins to make. I think there was a pretty clear opportunity for a player like Mohamed Kamara to come to Miami and to learn from a player like Shaq Barrett, who, aside of also being a Colorado State alumni, has like a lot of parallels with his play style and his play stature and the way that he plays the game. And if you were to assign Darius Robinson, who was the Missouri defensive lineman who went to Arizona in the first round, if you were to assign him as an interior defensive lineman, and for many teams he is an interior defensive lineman, this means with Chop Robinson and Mohamed Kamara, the Dolphins are getting my 4th and 5th ranked pass rushers in this class. And one of them just so happens to come off the board in the first round. The other just so happens to come off the board at 158 overall. And some of the reason Mohamed Kamara does slip a little bit in the draft is because he is not a traditional build for the edge spot, 6'1", 248 pounds. He's just short of 32.5-inch arm length. That's 3rd, 11th, and 10th percentile, respectively. So the size profile is not overly exciting, but linear explosiveness exists. He ran the 4.5s. He had a 1.58 10-yard split. That's 91st percentile for edge defenders. It's like there is a size hardship here that creates a little bit more of a narrow scope in which he can play the game, but there's still like physical tools to work with. And he is an absolute dog watching him play. He plays hard and he plays physical and he plays stout because he's so compact. This is not a big, high padded player. Offensive linemen have to punch down on him with consistency. And because of that, he has a little extra bit of slipperiness as a result. And there's some meaningful players that are on like the comparables list for him on his, when you just look at his athletic profile page on mockdraftable.com, which kind of keeps track of like what percentile all your measurements are. The one that I saw the most parallels with on the list from a play style perspective is Yannick Ngakoue, who was a 3rd-round pick out of Maryland in 2016, has become a pass rush mercenary. But I think Kamara has the same first step, low pads, good play strength to play through horizontal and lateral contact, and can turn a pretty good corner. So I think this is somebody who you put into this pass rush rotation when everybody's healthy. You got Phillips and Chubb, and now you got Chop Robinson with all of the explosiveness that he has. And all of my questions for Chop Robinson are not really in the pass rush side of things. I think he continued to expand his game as a pass rusher. But I feel much more optimistic about Chop Robinson as a pass rusher than I do a run defender right now coming into the league. And we'll see how quickly they're able to get their hands on him and facilitate growth with him. But then you have Shaq Barrett. And now you got Mohamed Kamara. You got a group of 5 guys. You're rolling 5 deep with like some absolute dogs. Some of these guys are absolute dogs. Some of these guys are all-world potential. Some of these guys are savvy vets that are long in the tooth. And it's a really nice group that you compare to now, I think, with the youth players that have been added into the mix. You compare it to that pass rush room that we saw in the playoff game. And obviously the Dolphins seem to do this every year. there's a position group that's a problem. It gives you a really hard time. And they decide not this year. And they don't address, they invest. And for the Dolphins to invest 2 of their 6 draft picks total, 6, 7. I'm not a math guy. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 of their 7 draft picks into the edge room and get my 4th and 5th ranked edge guys. If you're classifying Darius Robinson as an interior defensive lineman, you got a couple good players out of this class. Players that I think don't come without questions, but that's where I think there's some contrasting strengths of those 2 players in Chop Robinson and Mohamed Kamara. I actually think their strengths and weaknesses and their pros and cons create a nice foil among each other too, to do some different things. So I was head over heels to find out the Dolphins were getting Mohamed Kamara. There were a couple players at that spot that I was really liked. And what was fun was about 10 picks out, I had looked at my draft board and shared like, hey, here's the 5 best available talents that I have on the board before 158. And then 184 rolls around and the Dolphins pick one of the other 2 guys, which was Malik Washington, the wide receiver from the University of Virginia, who is just lightning in a bottle. He's a slot guy. I mean, we'll call it as it is. I think he's going to be has the opportunity to be a very successful slot guy, but he's 5'8". He's 190 pounds. He doesn't have the largest wingspan. It's 14th percentile wingspan, 12th percentile arm length. He ran 4.47, so he's probably Malik. I love your game, but you might be the slowest wide receiver in the wide receiver room. It's just for the composition of the group. But 4.47, 1.53, 10-yard split, which is 67th percentile, 42.5-inch vertical jump. 126, which is 10 feet 6 inches on the standing broad jump. A lot of explosiveness in his game as well. I think when you're 5'8", the stride length kind of prevents you from consistently being like, obviously the short area burst is there, but being able to open up your strides versus guys maybe a little taller. When you look at Malik Washington, I think a few things stand out. He had one of the best drop rates in the country. He was credited with 3 drops, but that was on 138 targets. He had 3 drops. So it's 2.6% drop rate this year. He was above average in contested catch situations. He was first in the country most qualifying wide receivers in missed tackles forced with 35. He was an intermediate area of the field player. When you think about some of the research that we did this season on the usage and the role of Braxton Berrios and how he was used versus how his strengths were supposed to fit within the offense, and there were some inefficiencies in the shorter areas of the field. Malik Washington's average depth of target was 8.1 yards, but still 35 missed tackles. He had 28 touches that were screen passes. That's inside the top 20 of qualifying pass catchers. He had over 1,100 yards from the slot and 93 receptions from the slot. This dude is tough too. And because he's 5'8", 190, he's built a little bit more like Tyreek than being like a slender slot guy. Like there is some density here. He averaged 3.15 yards per route run. That's right up there amongst the best receivers in the country. And he didn't just play. I mean, he played at Virginia, right? So he played University of Maryland. He played Tennessee. He played Boston College. And Tennessee had some dudes in that secondary. They played North Carolina and University of Miami and Louisville and Virginia Tech and Duke. They played meaningful competition. This is not like, oh, he played at a small school, so you could even just thumb your nose at it and say, oh, he played at the FCS level. He played in the ACC. But quite frankly, a bad offense. And was the offense. So this being a player who played the vast majority of his snaps, passing snaps in the slot, but has shown, at least to some degree, throughout his college career to have some outside alignment. I think he is predominantly a contender for some 11 personnel stuff and some depth. But they schemed it up and got the ball in his hands in the screen game. They let him work the middle of the field. He showed toughness in the middle of the field. He was more slippery than any other receiver in the country as far as at the catch point and with the ball in his hands to create missed tackles. Putting that potentially into this offense, if he competes and he gets on the 53-man roster and he earns himself some playing time, which I think he can do, at a 6th-round pick at 184 overall, is outstanding fit, but it's also outstanding value. I had a 3rd-round grade on both the players the Dolphins got in the 5th and 6th round with Mohamed Kamara and Malik Washington. Graded them specifically for Miami, and they were there. And 10 picks before Miami picked Mohamed Kamara, they were both amongst the 5 best players I had available on the board for the Dolphins. They picked them both. And I know it's not about my rankings, but if you look at the skill sets, if you look at how they fit, and you look at where the Dolphins got them, that's a lot of value. I think Wright, Kamara, and Washington have a really good chance to be meaningful contributors to your football team. And may take more snaps than at least Patrick Paul, because Patrick Paul, unless they have a 6th offensive line and tight end package for him, and look, maybe they do, because Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier were asked about balancing short-term and long-term and having plans for players, and they kind of said, like, look, we made sure that we had the players that we picked, there was some understanding of how they were going to help us be better this year. So we'll see what they have cooked up for Patrick Paul. I think if you told me he was the offensive lineman in motion in like their big run heavy sets, if he's running split flow action like they did with Trent Williams in San Francisco or with Detroit and Penei Sewell, I could see some of that stuff for him. Like, he's athletic enough to do it. So we'll see what they have for him. You know, but this is why, and again, you take your own advice, easier said than done. On Wednesday before the draft, I said, you know, get the full picture. And as this class came into focus, and I look at Chop Robinson, Patrick Paul, Jaylen Wright, Mohamed Kamara, Malik Washington, that's 5 players, the first 5 picks. They were all amongst my top 100 players in the class that I had graded for the Dolphins. And you only made 2 picks in the top 120. I think they did a great job on day 3. I think they knocked day 3 out of the park. Now, they did also draft Patrick McMorris, a safety from Cal, at 198, and wide receiver Taj Washington from USC at 241. And he's like a big play extraordinaire, big play specialist in that USC offense. McMorris is a player I got to familiarize myself with a little bit more before I talk to you too much about him. But a 7-man draft class for the Dolphins that I think the vision became clear throughout today of all days. It gave some clarity, and I think the Dolphins did a wonderful job. And we'll see who they manage to cook up on UDFAs. There's some UDFAs out there that I think are some high potential players as very skill-specific role players that I could see the Dolphins maybe having a need for as well. And this team seems to always find 1 or 2 UDFAs and catch lightning in a bottle. We're going to look forward to 2025 draft capital with just a few notes here to bring this episode of Locked On Dolphins to a close. So make sure that you stick with us. All right. Game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. And I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already mentioned Monopoly Go here on today's show. But there's just so much good stuff with this game. You can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. You win together. You win awesome prizes. You can unlock the more that you win. And there's a lot to get. There's unique stickers that you can trade with friends for complete albums and big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel with the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting your friends as you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big with massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to deliver in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. So there's some moving parts for 2025 because obviously the Dolphins moved their third-round pick. But the Dolphins are kind of back into a little bit more of a stable state with their draft picks. They obviously made the one trade today, 2025 draft capital. They have their own first-round pick in the first round and second round. They traded their third-round pick to Philadelphia for Jaylen Wright. The Dolphins are expected to get at least one compensatory pick in the third round, if not two, for the compensatory pick free agent losses of Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt. Reminder, that time frame for free agent signing expires on Tuesday. Monday night is the last business day that you can sign free agents and have it count against the compensatory pick according to the new collective bargaining agreement. So first, second round, you have your own. Christian Wilkins is a lock for a 3. You're going to have a 3, even though you traded a 3 to Philly. Robert Hunt is probably playtime dependent. That might be 2 3s, and that would be between 96 and probably 102 in the draft order. So you have a 1, a 2, potentially 2 3s. If you don't have 2 3s, you're definitely going to have 1, and it's probably going to be number 97 overall. And then in the fourth round, you have your own pick. And if Robert Hunt is not a third-round compensatory pick, he would then in turn be a fourth-round compensatory pick. So you're either going to have 2 3s or 2 4s. You're going to have 2 5s regardless because the Dolphins have their own, and then they have a fifth-round pick as part of the late-round pick swaps from the Bradley Chubb trade at the trade deadline. So you could be sitting here looking at a 1, a 2, a 3, 2 4s, 2 5s. Or a 1, a 2, 2 3s, a 4, and 2 5s. Your sixth-round pick belongs to the Bears as a part of the Chase Claypool deal, but that was a pick swap. So the Dolphins give their 6th to Chicago, and they get the Bears' 7th back. So on day 1, you have a 1. On day 2, in 2025, you have a 2 and potentially 2 3s, but at least 1 3 with the compensatory formulas. And then on day 3, you have at least 1 4th, maybe 2. You have 2 5s, no 6, and 2 7s. Volume drafting is back, baby. We're back in the saddle next year. We're going to have a lot more to work with unless the Dolphins, throughout the course of the summer, because this team still has some holes, and that's something that we talked about yesterday. You're putting a little bit more pressure on yourself with your summer free agent spree to find starting caliber players or meaningful veteran depth players to fill the void. And I think that's what's interesting is with all these picks and including an extra pick this year, having some offensive linemen at some spots along the board that might have made some sense. You drafted a long-term heir to Teron Armstead at 55, and that was it. You didn't draft an interior guy to say, well, we're going to bring this guy in and he's going to compete to start for us and upgrade. And we'd heard the reports. I know Barry Jackson, Miami Herald, had said that the Dolphins were in discussion with a number of veteran interior offensive linemen about potentially coming into the mix here. And I know that Greg Van Roten's name has been mentioned. I know Dalton Risner's name has been mentioned. You have Isaiah Wynn, Aaron Brewer, and probably Liam Eichenberg kind of penciled in as starters right now with Robert Jones, Jack Driscoll, some depth there. You need another guy for sure, and a guy who could probably start. One of those vet guys I think would make a lot of sense, and it was the Dolphins' strategy. And again, this gets clearer after you see them pass on some good value interior offensive linemen on day 3 of the draft. Is it, well, just the value of the other players was too good, and I would agree with that assessment? Or is it, well, we want veteran players to come in and be complementary and ancillary pieces of the offensive line versus drafting a rookie at this spot and putting all the eggs in that basket? I don't know. But what we do know is they're not going to get any more rookies for the interior offensive line. They're not going to start a rookie inside. It's going to be veteran players. but that it puts more stress on you to maybe not go big game hunting and sign one free agent. You probably got to sign 3 or 4. But now that we're through the draft, it just gives you a higher resolution on the work that still has to be done. And I'm sure if I open up and we do Power to the Pod at some point in the next 2 weeks, everybody's going to ask, do they have enough on the offensive line? My answer is going to be no. They're going to say, should we be worried? I said, only if it's September 1st. But now you got to go find it. But we'll get back into who's available on the market. We'll do another dive on those players in the summer to kind of get into who makes the most sense and financially what you could expect. The Dolphins obviously having some money open up with Xavier Howard post June 1st, plus whatever they potentially get when they get a Tua Tagovailoa contract extension. But this draft class, Chop Robinson, Patrick Paul, Jaylen Wright, Mohamed Kamara, Malik Washington, Patrick McMorris, and Taj Washington is a strong finish to a draft class that added a lot of potential early at premium positions where you have big contracts and you're trying to, again, stay ahead of the contracts to take the exit ramps as they come to kind of transition out of your certain phrase of quality starters and veteran players who you consider cornerstones and phase them out and have players behind. It's a little bit like the Cincinnati Bengals the past few years. Their draft strategy has mirrored that a little bit, where they have drafted a year ahead of some needs. And I think the Dolphins did that early. But I think the way that they complemented that with day 3 gives me a little bit more zen, if you will, about this draft class as a whole. We will have plenty more to talk about this draft class and the UDFAs that are to come. That's in the coming days here on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you keep it locked here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys check out the show. I'll try my best to keep it a buck with you. I'm not going to bat 1,000. But the job is to have an opinion on everything. So I will bring my opinion on everything and we'll react to things as they happen. And I'll try to give you my authentic thoughts and we'll explore them together and gain the clarity together on what works and what doesn't work and why it was done and what the implications are. That's why I love this show, this platform, and so many of you who make me a part of your day, which I'm very thankful for. Fins up. Keep it locked in here on Locked On Dolphins. Find us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I'm Kyle Krabs, and I'm out of here.